so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And indeed, we were commenting with Tibor, with whom we were colleagues and friends when he was Foreign Minister of Hungary, that imagine if you say, as you said, that foreign policy would be a chaos without Europe, imagine what it would be, because it's quite chaotic already with Europe. But this event gives me also an opportunity to say that in so many ways we need creativity in diplomacy in these days, that at the end of the day our words are not too far apart. This is, for me, a very good occasion also to reflect on something bigger, and I would like to thank you all and Tibor for allowing me to have this possibility to reflect on something bigger and deeper than the everyday crisis agenda of the current chaotic foreign policy. Almost 25 years ago, some were convinced that we were entering the era of a clash of civilizations. We were told that wars would be fought because of religion and culture. And you probably know where I personally stand on this. I believe there is no clash of civilization, that wars are still being fought on the same old reasons, very traditional ones: economic interests, natural resources, spheres of influence, power. All very old roots of confrontation and conflict. And yet, there are indeed cultural clashes to fight, but these clashes do not occur between civilizations. They occur more and more inside each of our civilizations. Culture has been a battlefield for Europe and in Europe for centuries. Today, some global and regional players believe that culture can be weaponized. You mentioned that. But culture can also be the place where people meet and make the most out of their diversity. This is the choice we have made as Europeans when our union was founded. We realized, when we came together, that our culture is at the same time Greek and Jewish, Roman and Anglo-Saxon, Christian and Arab, Latin and Slavic, French and German, Mediterranean and Scandinavian, religious and secular, and that there is no contradiction between the different aspects and layers of our culture. It was not isolation, but openness, what made Europe such an incredible place and project. And let me tell you, seeing this project so many times from the outside, talking to our partners around the world, this is still a project that the rest of the world considers extremely attractive as a model. Sometimes we forget it when we see it from the inside, but it is really the case. It's exchanges among us that made us richer and not weaker. Culture in Europe has always been and is always plural, because so many different cultures belong in this continent. European culture is diversity. European culture is distinction, and it is at the same time common ground. This is not always easy to understand or to see, especially in these times. It is true the so-called multiculturalism has not always worked, and I'm the first to say that. In some cases, it has led to segregation. In some other cases, it has led to confusion with people that do not know who they are and where they belong. Uncertainty has created fear, and fear is creating hatred. And we see it every single day, also here in the heart of Europe. Strong identities are the basis for openness. I'm fully convinced of that. Which also means that far too often those who are afraid of multiculturalism are those that do not have a strong identity, but rather pretend to have. And instead, they discover that they have a very weak one. Yes, in today's world, it is crucial to make sense of our identities and our differences. Fear originates when we do not recognize each other because we perceive diversity as a threat, or when we don't know each other or we don't understand each other. Our differences can lay, instead, the ground for dialogue, and dialogue is the basis of diplomacy, and the diplomacy that at the end of the day work. So you see, things are very much interlinked. Our diversity can be and should be our strength, as it has always been for Europe over centuries and thousands of years, especially now that we face common threats. And this leads me to the main topic of this conversation today. When Europe engages with the world, culture has to be at the core of our foreign policy. Culture can help fight radicalization and also prevent radicalization, which is the key if we want to really succeed. But it can also foster economic growth. It can strengthen diplomatic relations and mutual understanding. It can help us stand together to common threats. It can help us to build partnerships and alliances among institutions, for sure, but what counts even more, among our peoples, not only inside Europe, but in the rest of the world. This is why Tibor and I will present to the Council and Parliament next month a strategy for culture in the European Union external relations. This is something new. This is something needed. This is something that requires a strategy because it's no time for improvising anything in these difficult times we're living in. And because this is one of the great issues in our foreign policy, and it deserves to be treated as such, finally. So we decided together to turn the page and put the cultural diplomacy at the heart of our foreign policy because the times we're living in require so. It is probably clear by now that when I say culture, and I'm sure I'm in good company in this room, I don't just mean literature or science. Culture can be made by the street artist making the face of a new building, or by the artisan whose technique has been refined through the centuries. As an Italian, I could not avoid mentioning that. Culture does not necessarily need a master's degree. And dialogue among cultures is not about teaching our culture to the rest of the world. We need to learn as much as we need to teach, and actually we need to learn before we teach, and we need to listen before we talk. This is also something that sometimes we forget, and can be more and more at the center of a European way to diplomacy. And dialogue among culture is not just a matter for governments, it's a matter of people. No need to mention that in this room. But let me remind here an example that I believe is perfect for today's time, and when we talk about what culture and the connections in the world can do today. Just weeks ago, a great artist of our age passed away, Zaha Hadid. She was born in Baghdad, educated in Beirut, and became a world-class architect in London. Such a mix of influences has made her and her art great. So exchanges among cultures make us richer, even when we don't necessarily recognize it. And this idea has shaped also our new neighborhood policy in depth. So we decided to give cultural and audiovisual operators from our region the opportunity to take part in the Creative Europe program. We have strengthened the Eastern Partnership Culture Programme too, as well as cooperation with the Anna Lindh Foundation, which plays a very important role in promoting intercultural dialogue in the Mediterranean. But this approach goes far beyond our neighborhood. 10 days ago, I was in Indonesia, meeting civil society and religious leaders. And Indonesia, some of you may know, is a nation of 250 million, a Muslim-majority country. There are more Muslims inside Indonesia than in the entire Arab world altogether, hosting the most amazing variety of cultures and stories and languages in a peaceful way, in tolerance and understanding. It's at the other side of the world, indeed. It was a long, long, long trip, but there is so much, and so much of useful things we can do together and learn from each other if we meet each other and if we are ready to recognize that the added value doesn't only come from geographical proximity, but by an interconnected world that makes it relevant what you experience also at the other side of the world, because at the other side of this world, there are experiences that can learn a lot from what they have experienced over the last decades and centuries in some cases. Our foreign policy has to focus constantly on this kind of exchanges, particularly for the young generations. That's when we all learn how to cope with our world. Understanding diversity at a young age and understanding complexity is vital. More than half of the young people who studied abroad with Erasmus Mundus say the program has helped them understand diversity and dialogue among cultures. And let me say I can confirm this from my own Erasmus experience, that I believe made me a real European. That is when this thing started. Together with Tibor and also with Carlos Moedas, We are planning to further invest on the Marie Curie Sklodowska actions. The EU will finance 11,000 researchers a year to work outside Europe and 15,000 researchers from outside Europe to join us by 2020. And the EU will finance over 25,000 scholarships per year and some 170 projects joint between EU and non-EU universities, and this is to promote student and staff exchanges. This can only be expanded. We have a strong interest, including a strong economic interest, to do so. When young Africans come to Europe to study, they're getting skills and experience and expertise, for sure, that will stay with them for the rest of their lives, and back home, they might set up a business, work in a hospital, get into politics or institutions with a different view to Europe and the world. From our side, it is an investment in the future of their countries, also in the future of their lives, but it is also an investment in our own future, also in terms of security, but it's also an investment in our own present, because giving a sense of perspective to younger generations in other parts of the world makes them more confident that their future is going to be worthwhile. Young girls and boys who study in Europe bring back to their countries not just knowledge, but personal ties and a better understanding of who we are. This is also part of preventing radicalization. It is our interest to keep in touch with them and to create networks among them, and this is also part of our strategy that you have read, and I am trying to present today without going through the document as such. They can be our informal ambassadors in the world, and this is really asset that we could not underestimate. For the same reason, I will launch in the coming months a new initiative to bring together young people and youth organizations from Europe and the Mediterranean. You might know I've been working in the European Youth Forum for quite some time, and that has been also part of my European experience, cultural experience, that forged the way in which I see Europe today. And I believe that building on that kind of network, that kind of experience, the network of young people, organized and non-organized in Europe, together with their friends and counterparts in the Arab world, could help us a lot in understanding where our region is going in the decades to come. Mutual understanding is so much easier when you can relate it to a real face, a real friendship. This is also a great thing of culture, that it makes it absolutely impossible to consider people as numbers. It links every single person to a story, and every single story is worth to be told and worth to be listened to. As we are not numbers but persons, culture helps us a lot to realize that. But let us also be clear on something. This is not just about identities and mutual understanding or creating personal links. Culture matters to our economies and to our growth. The economic benefits of cultural exchanges are too often ignored, although the statistics are very clear on this. Global trade in creative products has more than doubled over the last decade, despite the global recession. Cultural and creative industries represent around 3% of the world GDP and 30 million jobs. It is not irrelevant in these times. In the European Union alone, these industries account for more than 7 million jobs. Culture makes a greater contribution to our economy than traditional flagship sectors, such as the automotive industry in Germany or the chemical industry in France. I'm not suggesting any competition, still remembering the numbers. But this is also true in our region, in our neighborhood, and for developing countries. Over the past few months, I visited the Sahel twice, and our friends there have told me this story a number of times. War, terrorism, and the desertification have dealt a huge blow to tourism in those lands. Think of Timbuktu or Agadez, that used to be major tourist attractions and whose economy now is in decay, to use a euphemism. And with higher unemployment, a number of people turned to the criminal economy, strengthening all kinds of illegal trafficking, terrorist organizations, and the smuggling of human beings. So, connecting the dots, a loss of cultural and touristic activities in a small town in the Sahel is provoking major trafficking in arms and human beings that might come to Europe. This means that we have a strong interest in investing in culture also far beyond our region. Cultural diplomacy is also about jobs, social cohesion and security. A relatively limited investment for Europe can make a huge difference in these places, and it can support our own interest, as I pointed out. The resilience of our partners in our neighborhood and in Africa is crucial for our own security and for our own prosperity. Let me come to now, I'm sorry, it's very long, but we have a lot to do and to discuss. Let me come now to cultural heritage. And let me start by saying that I believe yesterday we had two good news in this field. And I would like to thank Tibor for working hard on this and for all the work that we will hopefully do together in this respect. One good news is that I understand that 2018 will be the European Cultural Heritage Year, and that Tibor will work on this in the coming months. And let me welcome this very much, because I believe, and I'll come to that in a moment, that cultural heritage is a key part of our cultural diplomacy. But this is, first of all, a recognition to Tibor's work. Second, I try not to play the Italian, but still there are so many Italians in the room, allow me to do so. Yesterday it was presented in the European Parliament the first Blue Helmet task force that Italy has put at the disposal of UNESCO. Let me say that I hope that other countries will do the same and that the European Union is ready to facilitate this work in strong connection with UNESCO. I spoke about that with Irina Bukova several times. We are ready. Some countries are moving. I think we have a moral responsibility to do that, because the protection of cultural heritage holds a special place in this work. The European Union is already at the front line. We work with UNESCO all over the world with a contribution of 100 million euros. And this money went already to the restoration of the Timbuktu manuscripts in Mali and to Project Mosul in Iraq, where we are preserving the memory of destroyed cultural heritage thanks to virtual models. Creativity also in the ways in which we work on this. The images of destroyed temples and headless statues in Palmyra were so painful for all of us to watch. And not only for all of us in this room that are sensitive to culture, but I think to everybody in Europe. This has to do with the terrorist ideology, true, but it's not just that. And I would like us to focus on what is behind that. I shall repeat it once again. It is not a clash of civilization. And this is a trap that is very dangerous for us, because the very same terrorists are very often engaged in smuggling antiquities to finance their wars. So behind the symbols of ideology, there are the money. So again, this is about money and power, extremely traditional old roots of conflicts. And this is why we're working with UNESCO to set up a rapid reaction mechanism for the protection of cultural heritage. But we will also propose to the Council and the European Parliament new legislation to regulate the import into the European Union of cultural goods and close this channel for terrorist financing. And I'm counting on the European Parliament and the Council to work with us in this respect. It's also a matter of security. We also need to plan for the reconstruction of many destroyed wonders. We will share satellite imagery to take stock of damage and plan reconstruction properly. We will provide finance and expertise to assess damage and think for the day after. In many civil wars, a church or a bridge can have a huge symbolic power, not only a cultural one, a political one. Their protection and reconstruction is at times linked to reconciliation and to the chances of people to come together after the war, the rebuilding of trust and the respect for different identities. When we discuss with the leaders of Serbia and Kosovo, I witness every time that cultural heritage is above all about respecting history and protecting cultural and religious identity. And this is what the dialogue I facilitate between Belgrade and Pristina is often all about, to help them reach a shared understanding and build a common future together respecting each other and each other's identities. And again, this is what culture is about, and this is what diplomacy is about. We're seeing so many links: security, economy, migration, post-conflict, and we could continue. So the task ahead is huge. Cultural diplomacy is about conservation, but it is also about innovation and new ideas. It is about education, security, human development, and if we truly want to put culture at the core of our foreign policy, as we do, then we need the whole of Europe to get on board, with all our expertise, all our differences, all our history, and our full potential. All member states, from Spain to Estonia, have their own strong cultural heritage. This is the feature of Europe. Everywhere you go in the world, Europe is associated to culture, human rights, and trade. This is what I experience every single day of my work. And we're trying to include diplomacy in that. We all have deep and vibrant cultural relations and ties with third countries. Each of the member states does have a history and a past and a present of relations in the world. And this diversity put together is our strength. But we need all European actors to share the same sense of direction. Governments, regions and cities, but also cultural institutes, civil society organizations, artists, scientists and performers. Last month, we launched a cultural diplomacy platform to gather all these actors and engage them on a continuous basis, receive feedback, policy advice and support. And let me stress here one thing, that local authorities are particularly important. The World Cities Culture Report 2015 shows the excellent return in terms of growth and poverty reduction for cities that invest in culture. So cities can be a crucial player in our cultural diplomacy. But this is also true for national governments and parliaments, for foundations, and for any citizen that wants to engage in this. Culture belongs not to institutions, but to every single European citizen, and all can contribute to this work. So, to conclude, probably no other place in the world has the same cultural density as Europe. There's so much history, so many stories and cultures. We preserve millennial traditions, and we are among the engines of global innovation. We should not be afraid to say that we are a cultural superpower. I completely agree. And this is our strength, and it is our openness that has made us great, our freedom that made culture a European excellence. We did not invent the Arabic numerals, and we became the home to the greatest mathematicians in history. Some believe even that we didn't invent spaghetti, even though no Italian would buy this story. And by the way, food is also such an important part of our culture. Our culture is inspired by the word, and this is why it inspired the word. The way to the future, I believe, is this: to be open and inspired by what is around us in order to be able to inspire the others, proud of our heritage and open to the world. There is no other way to navigate a globalized world. If you do not know where you come from, you get lost extremely easy. And in this world of today, it's in any case very easy to get lost. So we need strong identities, strong cultures, and a strong sense of openness to manage to navigate through these waters. We know where we come from, we know who we are and what we believe in. We know what our values are. A dialogue with different cultures cannot and must not scare us at any single moment. In the era of social media and shrinking distances, our cultures are bound to meet. We have a duty to make the most of this encounter. Put culture at the very heart of Europe's external action. Refuse any clash of civilization and work for an alliance of civilizations and people. Cultural diplomacy is not just a hobby for intellectuals. It is a cornerstone in our relationship with today's world. It is vital for Europe and for Europe's interests. It is vital to promote our interests. It is vital to advance our values. And I believe that together with Tibor, together with many friends in this room, with Sylvia, with the European Parliament, with the many governments that are committed to that, we will manage to turn this page and open this chapter of our diplomatic toolbox, having culture as a full-fledged instrument of our external action. And I thank you very much for your support in this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's a great speech.
And we need to work together.